Taito was quite the prolific maker of arcade games back in the 80s and early 90s. Chances are you've enjoyed a number of their games if you were around back then. They were the ones responsible for great action titles like Roston, incredible multiplayer gun games like Operation Wolf. They even had a go at sprite scaling technology with a number of releases like Aquajack and Double Axle. In 1987, they released a side-scrolling beat-em-up called the Ninja Warriors that was presented across 3 screens. It was quite something to see at the time, though the gameplay was somewhat tame unless it was played with 2 players. In 1990, they tried again with Thunder Fox, a 2-player hybrid that mixed run and gun, beat 'em up, and shoot 'em up gameplay. It was developed for the Taito F1 system, which alone was quite powerful in its day, but Thunder Fox also used a custom version of it with a second tile map generator that produced some pretty wicked looking effects. The 2-player co-op was quite fun and it had weapons and vehicles to liven up the action. In 1991, Taito began work with iSystem Tokyo to port Thunder Fox to the Sega Genesis. It seemed like a match made in heaven, and I was really looking forward to it. In this episode, we will take a look at it and see how it turned out. Was it everything it could be, or did it fall short of expectations? Let's find out. Thunder Fox gets its name from our heroes of the story. The world is facing a new terrorist threat the likes it's never seen. The entire planet is at their mercy, and not even the armies of every nation can stop them. Enter Thunder and Fox, a 2-man demolition team who refuse to give in. They set out to stop the group's advance, and so the action begins. The gameplay here is again very similar to Taito's previous title, the Ninja Warriors. So much so you might even call it a spiritual sequel in many ways. Your goal is to walk straight into the enemy's ranks and basically take everyone out using knives, machine guns, flamethrowers, bazookas, and grenades. Be careful though, each weapon has limited ammo, so use them wisely. Your knife is your default attack and you have a jump kick as well. It uses a shinobi-like ability to jump to higher parts of the stage by holding up and jump. You can get to lower ground by holding down and jump. This super jump also damages enemies. Along the way you will come across crates that holds items and bonus points, as well as barrels that explode for area of effect damage. Extra life for your health bar can also be found in the field. Unfortunately, the full scope of gameplay from the arcade is not found in the Genesis port. First, you lose the 2-player simultaneous multiplayer. Thunder Fox on the Genesis allows you to choose between either Thunder or Fox, but omits the multiplayer entirely. The vehicle-based stages are also lost in the Genesis port. Even the on-foot action loses the jeeps and hovercopters that were in the arcade. There were also some major changes to a few of the boss encounters. For instance, the opening stage ends with a tank battle in the arcade, while on the Genesis, you get a helicopter. There are 5 stages in total, with 4 of those having sub-levels. Each area has a timer and you will lose a life if it runs out. There are also limited continues. I found the visuals of Thunder Fox to be part impressive representation of the arcade and a dismal failure of it. The Genesis often paints backgrounds with loads of moving layers and color that looks great for a title of that era. There are also large, well-animated sprites, but this 8 megabit ROM comes up short in many other areas, particularly when it comes to animation. The arcade original had extras like storms raging all around you in the first level, and the main characters and enemies having their own impressive movement. Things are dialed back heavily in the home port in these areas. While those background layers surely do look nice, they are missing the finer details and animation of the coin-op. There's also the case of the 2 vehicle stages being removed from the Genesis version. The arcade original had you flying a hovercopter in a dedicated shoot-'em-up area, as well as a jet ski run so you could battle on the submarine. These are completely cut, along with the vehicles in the on-foot stages. This seems more a cop-out than any real technical limitation on the part of the hardware. After all, there are plenty of running guns where vehicles played a role in the action on this very platform. I also didn't understand the lack of two-player co-op. It's not rare to see 3 or 4 enemies at a time on the playfield with a crater barrel in view. You're telling me that a second player sprite couldn't have fit in there somewhere. These visuals are not so eye-popping that such an omission makes much sense, especially when you consider there are much better looking Genesis games that support multiplayer. That leaves me somewhat lukewarm on the visuals. I like the backgrounds and the sprite detail. I was also impressed there's no real sprite flicker or slowdown to speak of, but this is definitely a step back from the arcade original in some major ways. This should have been a better looking game with more impressive special effects and animation. The music of Thunder Fox also happens to be a mix of good and not so good. I enjoyed a few of the tunes here, but found the soundtrack overall to be weak and not something you'll remember. The voices and sound effects are also quite unimpressive. It was composed by Zuntata, Taito's internal sound team, but this is not their best work. I have a few selections so you can see for yourselves. The real frustration of Thunder Fox comes from the simple fact that the building blocks for a great home port were in place and completely ignored. The arcade had beat 'em up, run and gun, and shoot 'em up gameplay. It had two-player co-op. It had vehicles. The developers decided to trim much of that back, pretty much just leaving the on-foot shooting and melee action for one player only. This was such a poor decision because the arcade wasn't exactly a long or deep experience to begin with, and the cutbacks took whatever thunder it had and mutes it on a pretty disappointing level. What it does well makes that even more bittersweet. As a well-known sucker for two-dimensional backgrounds, I really got a kick out of the many moving layers happening. They hold up well next to the original. In short, the foundation is here for this to have been a game worth playing. And it still may be as long as you understand the simplicity you're getting into. While lacking the variety of the arcade, the gameplay can be fun and easy to get into. There's nothing here broken, and you can certainly do a lot worse, but none of that excuses the cutbacks this home version suffers. Frankly, the lack of two-player support and removal of the vehicles and shooting stages is just a matter of the developer and publisher not wanting to go the extra steps of getting it done. It leaves us with an arcade experience that is more a shadow of the original rather than anything close to faithful. Whether that's enough for you likely boils down to how you yourself first played this. If you know nothing of its origins, chances are you can find something to like about it. But if you're coming in expecting something closer to the arcade material, you are going to be sorely disappointed. The gaming media of the day were quite tough on Thunder Fox. You can find a couple of positive reviews, but the overall consensus is that it wasn't very good. The Japanese press were often the most vocal, basically saying it lacked the few things that made the arcade stand out, and even the more forgiving European reviews weren't so kind. That's basically the legacy of this one. It's a decent arcade port that was missing the core of what made the original worth a few of your coins. As a home game, it faced incredible competition in 1991. Not only did it have a Sega Genesis lineup that included Batman, Streets of Rage, and Sonic, but there was also the Super Nintendo a few short months later. I imagine that means many of you never really gave Thunder Fox much of a chance, and I really can't say I blame you. Had this been released in 1990, it may have been enough to turn a few heads because there was so much less to play. But by 1991, there was no shortage of competition for your gaming dollars. Fast forward to modern day retro gaming, and that fact is amplified to a degree that almost makes Thunder Fox a complete waste. Fortunately, the arcade version is available in the compilation Taito Legends, or you can always fall back on emulation via MAME. The Genesis port is not the best way, or even a good way, to play this Taito classic. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.